Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We've spent a lot of time in the past unpacking the hardcore physical science of disasters, how they form, why they strike, and the sheer physical impacts they leave behind. But today we are shifting gears. We're focusing on the absolute most critical X factor in any response scenario, and that is leadership. Because honestly, you can have the most expensive equipment and the most perfectly written plans in the world, but as we're about to see, those plans are quite literally just paper until a leader actually steps up and breathes life into them.
So that brings us to a huge question. How do experts actually make life or death decisions when the plan completely falls apart? Because let's be real, that is the true reality of a disaster, right? The unplannable happens. Chaos just entirely takes over. And today, we're going to explore exactly how leaders take control of that chaos and establish order when standard everyday operating procedures simply do not apply anymore.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our quick roadmap for how we're going to build this system of order from the ground up today. We'll be hitting leadership in the chaos, how leaders make decisions, mastering situational awareness, organizing the response, and finally, the logistics pull system.
Starting right off with Section 1, Leadership in the Chaos, or what happens when the map fails.
Before we get into specific tactics, we really have to establish the fundamental mindset that's required when our comfortable, everyday routine collapses into a full-blown crisis. Now, we often mistakenly use the terms management and leadership interchangeably, but there is a stark contrast between them. Think about it this way. Management is all about doing things right. It's highly focused on standard procedures, efficiency, keeping the trains running on time. And in a stable office environment, management is absolutely king. But leadership? Leadership is about doing the right things. It requires vision and, most importantly, rapid adaptation. When a disaster strikes and tears your perfectly drawn map to shreds, your standard procedures are going to meet a reality they simply weren't written for. And that is exactly when a pure management mindset will fail you, and true leadership really has to take the wheel to navigate the unplannable.
Let's move to Section 2, How Leaders Make Decisions, focusing on cognition under pressure.
Now that we have that overarching mindset down, let's zoom in to the micro level, the literal cognitive process firing off inside a commander's brain. In a crisis, you obviously don't have the luxury of sitting down with a cup of coffee and a whiteboard to list out all your pros and cons. Instead, experts making split-second life-or-death calls use something called naturalistic decision-making, or NDM. Basically, this is the process of using deep, hard-earned experience to make decisions in incredibly complex, real-world situations where time is literally your biggest enemy. It's rapid, it's highly intuitive, and it is incredibly effective.
And this brilliantly illustrates how NDM actually works in practice, using what's called the recognition prime decision model. When a leader faces a crisis, they immediately scan their chaotic environment to recognize a pattern based on their past training. But once they spot a familiar pattern, they don't just blindly jump into action. Instead, they do step 2. They run a mental simulation. They essentially play a very fast movie in their head of what will happen if they execute a specific action. If that mental movie results in a success, boom, they act. If the simulation fails in their mind, well, they quickly tweak the plan or search for a new pattern entirely, and all of this happens in just a matter of seconds. It's a genuinely fascinating look at human expertise in action.
All right, Section 3, Mastering Situational Awareness and How We Perceive the Environment.
So we've looked at the internal thoughts. Let's scale up a bit to see how a leader perceives that chaotic outside environment. Now, situational awareness isn't just about keeping your eyes open. It's actually a critical 3-step ladder. Step 1 is perception, simply seeing the raw data. For example, imagine you see a river rapidly rising. Okay, step 2 is comprehension, understanding what that raw data actually means. In our river example, you realize the water is rising fast enough that it's going to reach your town in exactly 6 hours. Finally, step 3 is projection, predicting what will happen next based on that comprehension. You project that if the river reaches the community in 6 hours, the main evacuation bridge will be completely underwater by dawn. Only when you hit that third step, projection, do you actually have true situational awareness.
But leaders rarely work entirely alone in a disaster. When they bring their individual situational awareness to their team, they engage in something called sense-making. This is this critical social process where a team collectively stops, takes a breath, and asks, okay, what is actually going on here? It's the moment a group of responders aligns all their different perspectives to form a single, shared reality of the disaster they are facing.
Because without sense-making, you basically just have a bunch of really smart people running fast in completely different directions.
Which brings us to Section 4, organizing the response, or pulling structure from chaos.
Zooming out from small teams to literally hundreds or thousands of responders, how in the world do we organize a massive catastrophe? Well, professionals rely on the Incident Command System, or ICS. This is a brilliant, standardized, and highly scalable management structure. No matter the size of the disaster, the whole response machine is broken down into 5 functional sections. First, you have command at the top setting the vision. Then you have operations. These are the doers out in the field getting their hands dirty and executing the plan. You have planning, the thinkers who are tracking the situation and looking ahead. You have logistics, the getters who are finding the actual physical tools and personnel. And finally, you have finance and admin tracking the costs. It is highly modular, meaning it can expand or contract exactly as the disaster demands.
But what happens when a disaster is just so massive that it requires the local police, the fire department, the Red Cross, and federal agencies to all work together? In that case, you use a unified command. Instead of having messy turf wars over who is in charge, the leaders of all these multiple agencies literally sit down at the exact same table. They jointly determine the objectives, they agree on a single shared action plan, and honestly, most importantly, they speak to the frightened public with one unified voice. So the crucial point is that geography dictates strategy here. You have 2 very different workspaces. First is the Incident Command Post, or ICP. This is your tactical, muddy boots headquarters right on the scene where people are literally smelling the smoke. Then you have the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. This is a strategic, off-scene support hub filled with screens and planners. They are totally different environments, and mixing up the functions of these 2 places is an absolute classic recipe for failure.
Moving into our final part, Section 5, the logistics pull system and executing the plan.
All right, so you have your leadership mindset down. You've made the decisions, you've built your organization. Now you actually have to move the physical resources to save lives. And when it comes to logistics, there is this incredibly counterintuitive phenomenon known in the industry as the second disaster. When an emergency hits the news, big-hearted citizens naturally, instinctively want to help. So they box up old clothes, canned goods, teddy bears, and they just ship them straight to the disaster zone. The tragic irony here? These unrequested, often completely useless donated supplies arrive by the absolute truckload. They choke up the supply lines, take up critical warehouse space, and actually pull responders away from saving lives just to sort through a mountain of junk. It is a nightmare.
And this happens because well-meaning people outside the disaster rely on a dangerous push system, basically blindly sending what they think is needed into the void. To run a truly effective response, leaders must strictly enforce a pull system. In a pull system, absolutely nothing moves until the operations folks in the field actively request it. The response is driven entirely by specific on-the-ground needs pulling resources toward them. This completely eliminates that disastrous bottleneck of unrequested goods.
And to make this pull system flawlessly efficient, leaders rely on a concept called resource typing. Basically, this means categorizing every single piece of equipment, and even personnel, by its exact measurable capability. Think about it. If a town is flooded, a commander doesn't just call the EOC and ask for a boat. I mean, a canoe and a massive military hovercraft are technically both boats, but they do very, very different things. Instead, they request a specific typed resource, like, say, a Type 3 watercraft. This guarantees that when the field asks for a specific tool, the exact right capability arrives at the right place at exactly the right time.
As we wrap up our analysis of this material today, I really want to reflect on this incredibly powerful quote right from the source text. Disaster leadership is the art of stewardship under duress. I love that. It's not just about, bossing people around with a bullhorn. It requires a crystal-clear command presence, incredibly deep and dynamic situational awareness, and an unwavering foundational compass to guide an entire community through their darkest hour.
And I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. You've seen the frameworks today. You've seen the cognitive models, the standardized systems used to navigate the unplannable. When the carefully written plan fails, when the map is totally torn up and the chaos begins, are you ready to lead? Really think about how these principles might apply to the crises in your own life and your own organizations. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this explainer today. Keep learning out there, and I will catch you on the next one.